So London was much, much smaller in those days. And I mean, that's 90 years ago, which my mother took me for my first outing in the pram when I was 2 weeks old, was the Botanical Gardens. The nature in this country, it's a very beautiful country, tremendously varied. I haven't been able to see half nor a quarter of the beauty of the country. And I love the country, but I definitely did not like the people. And that I would leave this country as soon as I possibly could. Right from childhood, I had mediumship. My first meeting with my spiritual benefactors and companions happened when I was 4.5 years old. And that was a very striking event because I knew that it was important that my mother didn't know what was happening. So I was jumping in and out of my physical body all the time. When I mean my physical body, I could see me as a spirit. And when I was me as a spirit, I could see me as the little girl playing with the pram and the dolls. I don't hold regular conversations with them. For me, this faculty is something totally natural, and I thought everybody had it. At 19, I married a Polish airman, and 4 years later, we immigrated to Brazil. That was in January 1951. And I lived in Brazil. After the 10-year period necessary, I naturalized Brazilian. I separated from my husband. I went to live with the Brazilians, disconnected myself completely from the English community in São Paulo, the capital where we lived. And it wasn't for another 10 years before I was led to find the Spiritist teachings. I love Brazil. And as soon as I reached Brazil, I realized that this was a place I really loved and the people. And I knew that I had had past incarnations there. And once again, well, I mean, since I left my husband, I've always been alone. And it was a time where I had been having the worst time that I ever had in Brazil, alone. And I had got a certain point there to where I had no job, and I did not have one single penny more in my pocket. I had nowhere to live, nowhere to sleep, nothing. Now I can realize that I had got, I believe, mediumship-wise out of balance, without knowing, without understanding anything. And I was very, very upset, emotionally, out of balance, etc. And at one point, I was contemplating suicide. 2 phase roads, and in the middle, there was a little piece of grass, no wider than that, separating the 2 lanes. And I had got to the middle, and I had to cross the other side. And I stood there for a few minutes, waiting for a bus to come along at full speed. And I took the first step with my foot down into the road here. I was going to go under that bus. But as I put my foot down, it was like an electric shock. And immediately I jumped back. and horror at what I'd almost done. And I had to stand on that little tiny piece of grass there for 10 or 15 minutes or more before I could gather myself together to finish crossing the road properly. And I was horrified at what I'd almost done. And the next 10 years, something kept on coming into my mind intuitively, that I had to find something, that it was very, very important. Now, also I have to say this, I have a special passion for Jesus. I always had as a tiny child. Jesus was the most important human being for me. But when they started telling me that I had to find something that was very important, I did instinctively know that it had a link with Jesus. Also, it was the time when Roberto Carlos was blossoming, and he is so spiritual, and he had so many wonderful songs about Jesus, and it all started blossoming within me, the religious side, if you like to call it like that. And very recently, all of a sudden, somebody sent me a photograph of me in Channel 4 watching live Pingo Fogo. Out of that crowd, the young girl, you know, and they picked me out. They found me in the audience there with Pingo Fogo. When Pingo Fogo was finished, my spiritual companions were absolutely decided, and they were telling me in loud voices every 5 minutes, go to Uberaba, talk to Chico. Chico's got a message. And this went on 24 hours a day for 3-4 days in a row. So I sat down and I lifted up and had a good talk with them and saying, well, I've got no money now. Yes, I'd love to go, and I'm very happy and willing to go, but I have absolutely no money. But as soon as I have enough money, I promise you I will go. They stopped. Silence. And 3 months later on, the voices were back. I had never traveled in Brazil at all on my own, and I felt very insecure, and I knew Uberaba was a long way away and one thing and another. So, okay, they told me the day I had to go to buy my ticket at the Rodoviaria, and they told me the day and the time when I had to get the ticket for. So I just did whatever they told me. And the one thing that I had missed out, which I've just remembered, when they were telling me that I had to go and giving me all the instructions, and I was saying, but look, I'm an English person and we do things sort of properly. And I've got a man's name and the name of a town, a long, long way away in the middle of Brazil. How am I expected to find this man? And in the end, I heard, you'll find somebody on the coach will take you there. Oh, well, why couldn't you tell me that before? And of course, that's exactly what happened. As I started to put, because there were 3 steps up into the coach, and as I was just getting up those steps, the lady who's sitting next to me, she got up and said, oh, don't worry, Janet, because the people in front here, they're going to Chico, they're going to take you. I took about 2 steps inside the gate, and I was horrified. There was the door, and I could understand that that was the door where Shika was going to be, because there was a queue. And I see the queue going along there and coming up here, and then it turns around there, and then it's going around there, and I lose sight of the end of the queue. I'll never get to see Shika Xavier. I was horrified. Absolutely horrified. And there was the person who was looking after the people coming in the gate there, the lady. And then she started to come up towards me. Well, no, what's the matter? Can I help you? And I tried to say something to her, explain why I was getting so upset. But the first time I couldn't. But I was getting more and more upset, and she would come back and, well, let me see, what can I do? Let me help you. So in the end, I explained to her, well, I'm English, and there's a queue, and I'll never get to see Shika. I can't do anything. No, well, look, the door's there. Just go there and stand by the door. I said, what? I'm English. They'll lynch me. And it took her a long time to convince me that it was okay. And the last thing she said to me was, okay, well, that's all right, you see, it's all okay, don't worry, don't need to be upset. But now, when the door opens, you go in. So that's what I did. And I was the 5th person to see Shika. When it came to the moment of me being in front of Shika and him saying, well, oh, hello, who are you? I really didn't know what to say to him. But then when he actually said, well, what's your name? I said, Janet. And immediately, you know how you drop down a Venetian blind, blah, 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 like that. I saw this effect happen in front of old Shika's face here, and he was totally bewildered. The information that I gave him was not registering with him at all. Where are you from? And I said, Sao Paulo. And that same effect, I mean, I could see it visibly. And he was flabbergasted. He didn't know what to do. And the people standing around him, his friends and his helpers, all that sort of thing, they got the reflex from that as well. So then he tried to find a few more things to talk about, and after another few minutes, he'd ask the question again, or the 2 questions. And I gave him the same answer. Well, my name's Janet, I've just come from Sao Paulo. And in the end, he asked 3 times. I gave him the same answer every time. The thing happened every time, and he was just lost. He didn't know what to do. I put your name down in the book. So he walked as far as like that armchair over there, with his back to me, leant over this enormous great ledger that he was writing the names in there. And after a few moments, he looked back over his shoulder and said, oh, how do you spell your name? So I went across there and looked over his shoulder. And I collapsed and started weeping and everything. And I said to him, oh, Shika, no, write whatever you like, doesn't matter, anything you like there, just write it now. And I ran away. He'd written my real name, because Janet isn't my real name. And he'd written Jean, and he was starting to write my next Christian name. And he was starting to write Annette. Now, I knew that Shika was 100% genuine. I'd never doubted that. I knew instinctively straight away when I heard about Shika one day, no, this was a proper medium. And, you know, I was so amazed. I thought, well, I didn't need that proof. But they gave it to me. Well, then I don't remember anything more until all of a sudden there's somebody tapping me on my shoulder saying, "Oh, Janet, wake up, Janet, wake up." This was 7 o'clock at night. Now it's 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm sitting on a dining chair like that, you know, fast asleep. And the people who'd taken me there, they were tapping me on the shoulder saying, "Come on, wake up, wake up. There's Shiku, he's got something to give you." The place was almost empty. There were only about another half a dozen people there. He was standing up at the table. I was sitting like back here facing him, but quite a long way away from him. And he was standing up there and he was doing this at me, this at me. He'd received a message. It makes me so emotional. The message was very short, but it was from Becerra to tell me where I had to go and study. And it just had Grupo Espírita Batuíra, Becerra. We did, on the next morning, the Saturday morning, it was the gospel under the abacate tree. And then later on that afternoon, we came back to São Paulo on the Saturday afternoon. And the Monday, I was there on the doorstep of the Grupo Espírita Batuíra. And that was the 23rd of July that I was with Chico, the 23rd of July 1971. And so I started studying, and I studied there with them exactly 10 years. I was avidly studying all of Kardec and Emmanuel and André Luis and all these things. I just dived straight in. That made me realize that it was something that actually I already knew. And as I began to study it, read it, then it was like, yes, but yes, of course, I knew what was there. I went many times to Uberaba, but I always kept myself rather to myself. But I had lots of contact with Chico in a very special way. And what was so amazing to me was right from the beginning, and that very first episode that I told you about today, when Chico was still in pretty good health physically, he's always had, of course, a problem with his eyes, that I always used to stay till everybody practically had gone, and I always used to go down with him and the little gang there, and we used to have café de manhã na praça in Uberaba, and 6 o'clock in the morning the following day. As soon as I started studying there with the Batuíra, the people came along. I mean, I knew Divaldo right in the beginning there, and I went to the Mansão de Caminho, everything. That's the beginning of the 1970s. All the people who were in the organizers of the Brazilian movement, they all came to talk to me, and I couldn't understand this. I thought, this is weird. And one day I said to Spartaco, I said, look, Father, you know, I don't understand, you know, what's going on? Why this? You know, I mean, I'm absolutely nobody. I've only just come to the Spirit. What's going on? He said, oh, don't you realize? I said, no, I don't. He said, you're the only English person. You're the only English person in the Spiritist movement. And it was so amazing. I came here in London to look after my mother and to bury her. And the intention was, as soon as possible, go back to Brazil, carry on my life there. And very soon after my mother started to get ill, my aunt did. And not so long afterwards, I had to bury my aunt. And at that time as well then, that suddenly arrived from Germany one of my few old English friends from Sao Paulo. And she said that I've got cancer and my daughter's kicked me out. She had nowhere to go. By the time of all of this, I was totally, physically as well as emotionally exhausted. You cannot deny the constant presence of the benefactors, guiding you, helping you. And I think, like myself, a person alone, you're more in contact with the spiritual world, and they look after you. But as I said, when I first came back here to London, I could never have imagined what was going to happen. And then when they said, oh, well, let's start, you know, a whole group and everything. But once that phase came, I didn't want to go back to Brazil anymore. And I had become very interested reading all the books that, Divaldo's very good books, all about obsession, disobsession and all this business. I had got in Brazil very enthusiastic about all of this, and I saw the need here is so terrible. So as soon as I could, I invited Divaldo to start coming. And psychiatry in this country is gradually changing a little bit. So the idea that if you hear voices, you've gone mad, is beginning to be broken. And that it's being a blessing. But of course, later on in life, I found that my mother also had a lot of psychic faculties. She was always seeing spirits, and they terrified her. And we'd go to different places. It might be something historical, but it might be just a very old house that we happened to visit. And she would see spirits, and she was always terrified. She didn't want to know anything about anything. Right up until the time when, many, many years later, when she was a very old lady, and the last year and a half of her life, I came back from Brazil. This was her house. She lived here from 1955 until she returned to spirit in 1982. And in the end, she had to listen to me, because when I came home from Brazil to visit her, during the 1970s. As she opened the front door, she said, "No, I don't want to talk about that subject." Before she ever said hello or hugged me or anything, no, don't want to talk about that subject. But I always ended up, before I left, talking to her about it. And when she passed, then we started working here, and Divalda was coming. I'd invited Divalda to come, and he informed me that she had joined the group and she was studying. And when Divalda was coming every year in the beginning, when he was coming here before we had the group properly set up or anything, and I'd say to him, "Oh, Divalda, I will be able to go back to Brazil again, won't I?" "Yes, Janet, yes, don't worry, yes, it'll be all right." And the next time he came, I said, "Well, I don't know, I'm not going to be able to go back very soon, am I?" "No, Janet, not too soon." The next time he came, "But I will be able to go back to be buried in Brazil, won't I?" "Yes, Janet, yes, let's see how things are." And then the next time, "I'm not going to be buried in Brazil, am I, Divalda?" "No, Janet, you're not." You know, all the thing there, my intuition confirming all the time there. But I hadn't got a clue. I hadn't got a clue that what has happened was going to happen. It's very interesting being 90 years in incarnation, because you've got a whole sequence of events to look back on. And at the time, you can't understand, well, now, why is this happening? Or why did that happen? And why didn't that happen? You know, all that thing. But now, as you look back, you can see how the spiritual companions are allowing you your free will, yes, but if you have a job to do that you've committed yourself to, they give you so much free will, but when certain points in time arrive, then they bring you back and put you where you have to be.